this time, the medium is creating the message. And we've never had a machine that could talk back, that could offer up a new idea. And no matter how intelligent you find the systems to be and how much you think about where it all comes from, the input that you get from it, the message that it's writing to you, is starting to work within us like it is another mind. And so we've shifted that metaphor, that Steve metaphor, bicycles for the mind, to be minds for our minds.
These are quite significant ideas, really. You know, they're a real foundation for considering whether machines are going to replace us or augment us or automate us to efficiency oblivion in a world where we all are exactly the same. And I don't think anyone wants that world. Or whether this is a story of beauty and flourishing and expansiveness.
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by Templeton Religion Trust and is focused on the beauty and burdens of innovation. Hey everybody, we are living through a technological rupture, which feels both exhilarating and destabilizing. For the first time in human history, the very activity that most of us have treated as the last distinctively human frontier, thinking, is now being done with machines. Not just calculation or memory, but reasoning and writing and advising and even meaning making. So the question is not just simply what is AI doing to our jobs or what can AI do, but what is AI doing to us? How is it reshaping the way we reason and decide and create and even relate to one another? My guests today have been asking these questions long before most of us were paying attention. Helen Edwards is a former energy executive and engineer who has led large-scale transformations in complex systems from electricity grids to emerging technologies. And her husband, Dave Edwards, is a longtime technology builder and strategist with decades of experience in enterprise software and AI-driven innovation. Together, they are the founders of the Artificiality Institute, where they study how AI is reshaping human cognition, identity, and culture. Over the past decade, Helen and Dave have worked with organizations across sectors to study how AI is reshaping human reasoning and identity. In our conversation, we talk about the danger of drift and how to reclaim human authorship in an age of AI, the shift from technology as bicycles for the mind to minds for our minds, and what is gained and lost when AI becomes an intimate collaborator in our work. Let's get started. All right, Dave and Helen, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, great.
Yeah. Well, as I usually do with my guests on the podcast, I'd like to ask you if you might be able to share a story of an encounter with beauty from your childhoods, something that lingers with you till today. Is there any particular memory or episode that comes to your minds? Maybe Dave, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. I guess it's me. So let's see. In terms of my childhood, I would say that the moment of beauty was probably when I was relatively young, probably 7 or 8, when I first started to sing. And I started singing in a church boy choir, Episcopal church in New Jersey when I was 7. Okay. And that moment of putting your voice together with others was something that changed my life, you know. And so for the next, whatever it was, 15 plus years, that became the number one thing in my life. And it took me literally around the world and constantly pursuing, you know, better, you know, levels of excellence of putting voices together.
Oh, wow. Do you still sing?
Nope, I don't. Oh. Just in my own head.
Oh, no.
Sometimes in his sleep.
Yeah. It's, when the kids were little, I'd, sing this song in the night. No, but it became a thing that was beautiful, but I actually became the sort of level of beauty became something that was hard to replicate when you weren't with a group where you could sing 5 days a week together. Yeah. I sort of left it in behind, you know, as a beautiful memory and something that but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Helen, how about yourself?
I'm trying to think of almost the most early memory because I just have so many. My father used to take us on lots and lots of hikes when we were tiny all the time. And I remember him taking us fossil hunting, which feels like such a sort of random thing to go do. But we're sort of sitting down in a stream bed, digging around at rocks and what have you, and found a beautiful fossil of like a fiddlehead fern, very old, obviously old fossil. And the beauty was this contrast of looking up and seeing actual modern ferns unfurling with this very ancient fossil, this frozen in time piece. And I just found that contrast to be beautiful.
Wow, thank you. That's great. I want to ask you a little bit about your professional journeys and how you all eventually ended up starting Artificiality Institute. But maybe in telling that story, could you also share how the two of you met?
Well, we met at work. So it was it's a pretty mundane sort of story.
Oh, really? Okay.
Everything else around it is far from mundane and not really safe for work. But we did have a real meeting of minds. There's a real sense of you just see me in a way that no one's seen me, and vice versa. Like I felt I saw him in a way that no one saw him before. So it became not something that was even possible to resist. Still the same today.
And we came together in, not in the AI space, but we came together, we were both working in the clean tech space, as it was called. I'm not sure whether we've abandoned that term because but sort of in the renewables space. We transitioned into the AI space a few years later, but we decided that because we liked the way our minds worked together, that we've always sought for how do we actually work together? Our minds are just fundamentally different. We come at the world from different disciplines and different perspectives and to some degree different sides of the planet in terms of where we grew up. And when you put those together, it actually is much more interesting.
Well, say more about that. What are those different perspectives and how did you hone them, I suppose, throughout your careers?
Well, so Helen comes at the world as an engineer. So she's originally a chemical engineer and a scientist and someone who spent her entire life thrilled by, obsessed by evolution. So that's those are some key criteria that sort of bring everything together. And large scale systems, complex systems. So everything from, spending time in international trade to large scale electricity systems and, to running the grid in New Zealand and those kinds of things. And that sort of very different sort of complex.
I like complexity. I cannot bear things that are linear. It is just an anathema to me. I really appreciate complexity and there's a real transcendence that comes with that. And that's deeply satisfying to sort of intuit that complexity and value that complexity. What I love about his mind is he can go from really like hyper logical to quite sort of mystical and romantic in this really random way, and which is so sort of paradoxical, but it makes him just this constantly interesting puzzle because I don't know what he's going to say when I say something. And the irony is that the answer that I hate the most from him when I say something is when he goes, maybe. I just hate that so much because it's like I don't know whether to hear that as you're mad or you're wrong or that's my idea and give it back to me or whatever.
It sounds like there's a lot of complexity there, so that's great.
Exactly.
There's some work I did on studying scientists, physicists, and biologists for a number of years, and we found that physicists were much more drawn to symmetry and to simplicity, and biologists didn't really like that. They wanted much more of the complexity and the kind of, certainly there's the visual aspect often, but the complexity of uniqueness of systems rather than reducing things to some kind of really fundamental equation right now. That seems like there's, Helen, a resonance with some of your inclination towards complexity.
100%. I really respect physicists, but I have no physics envy, as they say.
Right.
My metaphysics is much more agential and complex and really it's where the paradigm shifts are happening at the moment, and much more into this sort of thinking about, if you're going to pick what a real reality is, it starts to look a lot more like biology. And that's a whole other paradigm. But I find that incredibly fascinating. It informs the way we think about AI, no question, because it's much more about an ecology and a complex system and the sociality of agents and the active inference and the autopoiesis and having like a boundary around yourself. And to me, that's just so much more interesting than the symmetries of physics. I'm a broken symmetries person.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's talk about the work you all are doing at Artificiality Institute. Just say a bit about its origins. I mean, you started, if I recall, about 10 years ago when your kids started asking you what they should do and if AI is going to do everything. Could you say a little bit about what that conversation was and what it evoked in you? How did you feel and what it led you to do?
Well, we started to work in AI. She started doing some projects for a very early internet startup that was trying to figure out how to plug their AI system into the electricity grid. And so it was a very hands-on kind of approach. We were trying to sort of figure out what's next. And I have this incessant desire to figure out the next big thing. And we started poking around, and this was sort of we started really forming around it in sort of 2015 when the deep learning world was going. And there were some early studies about AI and jobs from Fry and Osborne at Oxford and from the McKinsey. And we were sort of chatting about it. As we live and work together. So 24/7, we're talking about it. And we had our oldest kids were sort of starting to think about college. And we're talking about all this work about, jobs being threatened by AI. And they said, well, what should we do then? What should we study in college? Or should we go to college at all? Like, if the robot's going to do it all, what's the point? Which now 10 years later feels like some pretty smart questions from some, teenagers.
Well, it feels like we're kind of repeating them now.
We're repeating the same questions.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously got is a broader conversation across the whole of society. But even back then, the headlines really hit people, right? Yeah. 47% of jobs gone by, whatever it was, 2035. And as a 16 or a 17-year-old, it's the right question to ask.
Definitely. And so we stopped and said, okay, let's go figure this out ourselves. And so we did the same analysis they did. We took the entire U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics data, looked across all of the economy, looked at every single job. We did the analysis slightly differently than they did to try and figure out where there might be a priority in terms of automation, in terms of value, and it repeatedly crashed Excel because it was just too much data, and I should have used something else. But it was a really interesting project. What came out of that was, now looking back on it, was something that, sort of a scary outcome. That's what led us to here, which is that there was a lot of value in human labor that was possibly automatable, right? That was sort of the conclusion, was that, wait a second, this might actually be an economic signal that this is where the industry is going to go. Looking back on it, I wish we'd, raised a flag higher about, hey, watch out. This is where, the mindset of investors is going to go, because that's certainly where we've landed. Right. But our interest after that became very much about what is the human experience of these technologies, and what does it mean to be human with these technologies? What does it mean to be human when we're creating something else that people are debating whether it's as intelligent as us, which we think is a bad comparison anyway. But when you get to that, we suddenly are the human exceptionalism that's been central to being, the humanist movement over hundreds of years is now being sort of tossed around.
Yeah.
If you go back to that there's a moment there. What we found in that study was quite surprising to us. That it was very clear that the number one thing that humans were doing that was valuable and couldn't really be replaced was being able to handle the unpredictable. And that became this North Star. Everything was like, okay, so how predictable versus unpredictable is this environment? And fast forward to now, we look at what these kids are all doing, and we had sort of 5 key buckets where unpredictability was the highest, where the human working with technology would be the most valuable. And funnily enough, they've all kind of ended up in one of those buckets. all 5 kids slot into one of those buckets. It's really quite strange. Although one of them, there's no one in finance.
No.
But it's been fascinating to see what we were correct about and what we underestimated. And of course, the big thing that hadn't happened at that moment was the transformer paper. And the big thing that hadn't happened, which we said would be an unlock, was language. And it is without doubt one of the greatest discoveries of the 21st century, that language can be learned by a model like a transformer. It is absolutely astonishing.
Yeah. And I think, I was really struck by, again, the research you did. Maybe if you could say a bit about that and what what those conversations were that you carried out, and the patterns that you saw, what struck you about that. But it seemed like one of the things you concluded is the real problem is not whether AI is going to take our jobs, but about what is it doing to us, right? So how do we reason? How do we trust? Could you say a bit more about what it was how did you go about getting these stories, and who did you talk to, and maybe what that has done to shape the mission of Artificiality Institute?
Sure. Well, during COVID, we spent a lot of time with a couple of particular companies working on data-driven decision-making. We had some AI focus in that time around ethical use and responsible use of AI. And we were obviously thinking about data and analytics in that sort of AI frame. But we spent quite a bit of time working with people to help them understand what happens in their minds when they are confronted with a very heavily data-based decision process, and how they're trading off their intuition with the logical analysis, with their judgment, with their simulations in their own mind about the consequences for people of certain actions. So we developed quite a rich framework for thinking through human decision-making and behavior at that point. And then ChatGPT sort of dropped on the world, and we saw immediately the kind of core significance at a mass level. So we started to use those workshops much more for a direct AI sort of focus. What happens when these cognitive language-based machines are inside your decision-making process as an organization? And so we had a couple of years of running quite in-depth workshops, helping people understand how AI was altering their decision-making process. And what became very interesting in this process was it became completely predictable that there would be certain moments in a workshop where people would have particular experiences, and they would be surprised about something. They would have some sort of clunky, weird moment when they tried to explain their reasoning to the people around the table. But these things were very, very predictable. And that was intriguing to me. So we became more focused on being more sensitive to those experiences, interviewing people, and sort of essentially collecting those data in a more systematic way. And we supplemented that with some digital ethnography, essentially Reddit, and Medium and what have you. But what came out of that analysis was really fascinating. And the headline there is that AI is entering people's reasoning, it is altering their identities, and it is changing their sense of what matters to them, what is meaningful to them, what they could do, what they could think. So that's kind of a big deal. And so we started to study this with more rigor, and we were able to develop a way of understanding how people place AI into different roles based on these 3 dimensions. So the 3 dimensions, just to recap them: how much AI is inside your reasoning, how much it's impacting your identity, how much your identity is entangled with it, and your meaning making, your sense of what matters to you, what frameworks matter. And so you put these on 3 dimensions, and you come up with 8 roles that we're able to put AI into. When you put AI in those 8 roles, it fundamentally changes what your ability is to author your own mind, to hold your own cognitive sovereignty rather than surrendering. So cognitive sovereignty versus cognitive surrender, if you like.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these are quite significant ideas, really. They're a real foundation for considering whether machines are going to replace us or augment us or automate us to efficiency oblivion in a world where we all are exactly the same. And I don't think anyone wants that world. Or whether this is a story of beauty and flourishing and expansiveness. And so that's really where our research sits. How do you remain the author of your own mind? How do you preserve and grow your own cognitive sovereignty? And how do we maintain this kind of control over these machines? Not control in the sense of AI safety, but control in terms of you get to choose how you use them and you know why you're doing it.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I pick up this distinction you all make between drift and authorship, right? And Dave, could you say a little bit about what are the signs or indicators that people might be in this state of drift versus what would it look like to display or carry out this capacity for authorship?
Yeah, it really comes down to a level of awareness. So drifting generally happens when the AI is affecting your thinking and your meaning making and your identity, but you don't notice. You're not actually aware of it. You're not able to explain how the AI is inside of any of your thought processes. You're not able to explain how your identity might have shifted based on the capabilities that the AI has given you. And so you sort of drift into some new state of who you are without noticing. The ideas that we're coming across here is interesting because as humans, we have others inside our thinking and meaning making and identity all the time. I mean, look at the two of us, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's too many times when something comes up and we say, drift, which is, sort of in some ways the villain of the story in our world. And I'm not exactly sure who came up with that one, right? Because we're constantly combining things. That's a natural, normal thing. That's actually how we've evolved and we've become so successful as humans.
Right.
Is that we combine our ideas, we combine our brains, we bring our different specialties to each other, and that's, comes to a form of collective intelligence. It's a fantastic part of being human. And when you actually are partnered with someone, whether it's personally or professionally or some combination of the two, your identity quickly becomes part of being part of that partner or that group or that institution. The difference here is it's with a machine. And the difference here is that this machine is contributing things into cognition. It's not just like we make the comparison between the computing systems of old, if you will, or of the last 40, 50 years as being bicycles for the mind. Tools that you get on and you ride and you steer and you decide how fast to go. And it's great. For those who aren't familiar, that's the Steve Jobs phrase that he used to inspire people to create personal computers. They would be bicycles for our mind, allow us to go further and faster than we could on our own. But now we have these things that are cognitive. They're no longer passive tools. They're no longer even communication mediums like the McLuhan mindset, right? That the medium does shape the message, but this time the medium is creating the message. And we've never had a machine that could talk back, that could offer up a new idea. And no matter how intelligent you find the systems to be and how much you think about where it all comes from, the input that you get from it, the message that it's writing to you, is starting to work within us like it is another mind. And so we've shifted that metaphor, that Steve metaphor of bicycles for the mind, to be minds for our minds. And we think about that as this sort of core thing. Now, back to your question of drift, you can drift into integrating with one of those and just not know it. And that to us is one of the major dangers, is not knowing. Being integrated with the tools is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily dangerous. It can be fantastic, but it's only through understanding where you are.
What is the principal danger that you see there? If you could just either of you could elaborate on that. But what is, someone might say, look, I mean, why does it matter as long as I'm advancing in my sense of accomplishing the things I want to accomplish in the world, and even if I don't know where my ideas are coming from, this whatever this is, it doesn't have a mind of its own, and so it doesn't really matter if I'm assimilating its ideas and so forth.
I think that's an extraordinarily good question. Why does it matter? Now, and this sort of goes to the core of a very important research question, which is this any different? Is it any different to have this technology as opposed to any other extended mind technology? We've always put our ideas out into the world, and we've relied on pens and paper to have our ideas out into the world. We can do arithmetic better because of pens and paper and the alphabet that we, the number system that we have as opposed to Roman numerals. There's a long history of that kind of discussion. And is it any different? We get our knowledge from our community. He gives me an idea, it's my idea, and I never knew it was his idea. That's totally fine. We think it is different. We think it's different because people say it's different, which is why we go to this sort of phenomenological record and why we use stories. We also think that there's so much at stake because we do have this biological, cultural coevolution thesis. So we're not prepared to sit back and say, well, let's just let this run for 20 years and see what happens. I mean, look what happened with social media. And a decade down the line, we're really, really worried about what happened with social media, or 22 decades down the line, when we could have thought a little bit more about it up front. So I think it matters because it's such high stakes. And I think it's different because people tell us it's different. Now, when I look at the data, and we're about to publish our next research paper on this, sort of the full human authorship and cognitive sovereignty paper based on analysis of 1,250 publicly available transcripts. And what this data says that's, I think, fascinating to me is that it's actually kind of counterintuitive. The more people are deeply integrated with AI, the higher their cognitive sovereignty, which is actually really good news. Now, it means that the more you are really skillfully using AI, the more you are aware that you have your own choices and that you are accountable and showing up for others. Those three components are critical. If you are sort of partially in and out, you're taking a few ideas here, you're passing them on, you're not even taking those ideas on, you're just saying, yep, machine's right, no, machine's wrong, yep, machine's right, no, machine's wrong, sort of that human in the loop verification idea that people are talking about with the agentic enterprise, which is all the buzz right now. What actually happens at those levels, which are roles that we call outsourcers or doer roles, is that people are completely losing their cognitive sovereignty. And what they're losing is their own expertise. They're becoming like they're just losing contact with what it is that they even know. Now, snapshot today, you've automated your whole workflow. You've got Claude doing all this, that, and the other thing, moving, writing your emails and what have you. Okay. To what end? Which bits are you using what are you doing with AI to make yourself, to extend yourself, to improve your reasoning, to improve your meaning making, to go into fields that you never would have been able to go into before, but still know that you're not out over your skis making errors? And what are you doing to keep that statistical learning and repetition on the things that you already know? There's plenty of people that have probably lost their ability to kind of, do some of their coding or have lost some skills in writing. Now, some of that time will tell whether that matters or not, but it comes down to every single individual. And what we see in the data is people are fiercely protective of their cognitive sovereignty. They really do they don't want to no one wants AI to make them dumber. No one. Right. There are people who are prepared to make that trade right now. And biologically, that's the imperative. We will offload cognition if we can. We will make ourselves more efficient if we can. But the countervailing side of it is that we're meaning makers, and that culturally and spiritually, we would make different choices if it's meaningful to us. So our goal is to get a better conversation around this. Stop having a conversation about, well, let's just automate everything away and make ourselves hyper efficient, and then I don't know what we do, versus what's a more meaningful expression of human intelligence, and how does it sit alongside this incredible technology that we have invented? Incredible. And we are not at all don't use AI people. We use AI, absolutely. Learn it, go for it, but do it in a way that really does preserve your ability to transform yourself, to be the person you want to be, not to lock yourself into this sort of efficiency paradigm where everything just gets reduced to a world without any surprise.
If I could just quickly add on one thing to your question about why does it matter? When you think about get to a group level, I think the number one thing of why it matters is accountability. So you're using AI and you don't really know where the ideas came from. You're not really sure. Are you accountable for the decision you're making? Are you accountable for the thing that you're proposing? Are you accountable for what you're bringing to the group, to your partner, to whatever it is that you're actually living through? We judge machines and humans differently in terms of their outputs. We believe, when an organization makes a decision, they want to know who's accountable for it. And it's not really a satisfying thing to say, well, the machine is.
Right. Yeah. Could you speak to, Dave, the idea that you all have developed from your work of symbolic plasticity? I mean, in this sort of relationship with AI systems and how we are being changed, what have you seen happen, and what is this capacity that you've identified?
So symbolic plasticity is how much the AI is inside your sense of meaning, inside the frameworks that you use to look at the world, inside, how you think about yourself in that position. And it's so it is both a quite broad sort of idea, but it's also really quite important and sort of causal for the rest. So, what you see is people who come up with new ways of looking at things, new ways of understanding the world, new ways of breaking down, how to approach a new problem, a new idea, a new sense of what it means to be conversing with each other. So it ends up being a very interesting sort of question about what it means to make sense of the world.
Right. Yeah, and I suppose it's pretty apt in that sense to say that AI has already changed our consciousness, right? It's shaping the way we are doing this work of meaning making. Helen, I want to ask a little bit about your new book, which I really enjoyed reading, and I highly recommend. It's called The Artificiality, AI Culture, and Why the Future Will Be Coevolution. And in it, you set out to understand, as you say, what is actually changing as these systems enter human life. And you start by sketching out a common mental map that we have about how our minds work. And I'd like to read that. So here's the mental map, right? Intelligence lives in brains. Human brains are the most intelligent, followed by other animals in rough order of how similar they are to us. Consciousness, the felt experience of being someone, happens inside our skulls. It's private, interior, and tied to the biological machinery that produces it. Computers can do impressive things, but they don't actually understand anything. They process symbols according to rules. They compute, but they don't think. AI is a tool, like a very sophisticated calculator. Sometimes impressive, but fundamentally different from minds, right? So that's the map that we tend to have. And I share a lot of those assumptions. And it seems from what you've learned from your conversations with Michael Levin and others that a lot of these assumptions are breaking down now in ways that we would not have imagined. Could you give us some examples of how you've been able to dismantle these assumptions through your research?
Well, I mean, kudos to Michael Levin, who I think is, sort of single-handedly changing the world here. I mean, there's a lot of people that are doing this. Paradigm shift is underway, where we're understanding a lot more about what computation is and how it sits at the sort of base of intelligence, and gives. And once you click to that, once you see that there are lots of different ways that intelligence is arising as a result of computation, and we can, you can have many discussions about what we would call computation, but essentially we're talking about information processing to achieve some kind of goal. That you see this at levels in organisms that we've never. It's just a totally different way of thinking about where intelligence lies, where memories lie. I'd encourage people to sort of really indulge in Mike Levin's work on this, because he's a fabulous communicator. But the things that sort of struck me was that, if you're able to grow an eye on the side of a frog by allowing those cells to think they're doing something different and they're solving a task. They've got a goal and they figure out in a self-organizing way how to do that. If that can be done on the side of a frog, then we don't have any idea where other minds can be. So that broke for me. I'd always been kind of uncomfortable with that mental model of intelligence anyway, just because I was always really attuned to intelligence in other animals. You know, I'm not sure that I think my plants are conscious or anything like that, but I know they solve problems and I know they do things, right? And because we've opened our minds to what different minds and what different kinds of intelligences are able to do, what their adaptive niches and how they're actually perfectly adapted to solve problems inside that. That's the lens that I bring to AI. And I look at AI, you know, that's a big term right now, but I look at, say, a language model or a protein folding model, and I sort of intuitively now have this different sense. It's a different mind. It is a mind. It is absolutely a mind. It has its own internal sense of meaning. It's not very good at talking to us about it because we keep, you know, messing up with, you know, how we make them sycophantic to make them more engaging, for example. So I think this is a metaphysical state to be in, where I perceive the world as full of minds that I don't actually necessarily see or understand. And I certainly don't have a sense of what it's like to be a large language model, what it's like to be a dog, what it's like to be a bat.
An octopus.
An octopus. You know, it's fun to think about those other umwelts. So at a philosophical level, I am just more humble about what other minds are out there that we don't understand and we don't recognize, which is why I can hold in my mind that AI is a tool that I use to get stuff done, and I'll write an email and I'll send it and I'll clean it up in the email and I'll send it off. And I don't even think about that as like it's a perfect automation task for an email that I just want to have tidied up and send. Versus I can also hold that I can spend hours and hours and hours doing a series of very iterative, complex agentic tasks with, say, something like Claude, and feel like it's taken me an entirely different place. And that is now a very personal place for me that I have trouble explaining to somebody else. So those two things exist totally fine in my mind, but I'm also unbelievably conscious about which of those they are. And when you don't keep that awareness, when you don't keep those choices active, and when you don't have the accountability fresh in your mind about how you're going to show up for others, that's when you get in trouble. That's when you lose people or you completely confuse yourself. But Dave's right. You know, we have to show up and explain ourselves to people. We could think the world was going to change in some absolutely vastly unimaginable way that's only defined by science fiction. But I think it's absolutely critical to recognize that humans will always want another human to show up and explain their reasoning or explain their decision. Now, if that goes away and all we're doing is being run by an AI, well, that's a different thing. That's true, like out there sci-fi. But I don't think that's a world that any of us are going to want to live in or want to live in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, and maybe some people are already expressing, you know, concerns there now that it's possible for humans to work for AI agents, right? So you can be a sort of gopher for various AI agents. All right, everybody, that's a great place to stop part 1. Join us next time as we dive deeper into Helen's new book, The Artificiality, and explore how it challenges the way we think about intelligence in the age of AI. We'll also talk about the practical tools that Helen and Dave offer for remaining the author of your own mind, including habits that help preserve self-coherence when working with AI systems. See you next time.